Hi, everyone, and welcome to PRO Talks, the PR Office's podcast all about PR communications, tech property, and everything business related you can think of. Today, our episode is going to focus on this week's autumn statement and specifically on what we can expect from it in terms of policies impacting the science, technology, and investment sector in the UK. And with me to talk about this, I have a very fitting guest, Allan Nixon, Head of Science and Technology at think tank Onward, a leading think tank in Westminster, specialised very much in this area as well. Welcome, Allan.
Thank you for having me on.
Of course. Before we go into any sort of policy detail, have worked previously as a special advisor across various government departments, including with Number 10. So I just want to see if you could share with us sort of people in those roles now and people in Jeremy Hunt's office at Treasury. What are these last sort of few days like for them? What was the weekend like? Is there already a set sort of speech and set of announcements there and we're just waiting to hear it? Or do they sort of make last minute adjustments just, in the days before?
Yeah. No, that's a good question. It's a bit of both, really. So in terms of when you work out what departments are going to have announced, or what, like the announcements are for each department, that will have been going on for weeks, frankly. There'll be lots of horse trading between departments where they will have submitted bids. Often they will be perhaps more than they will end up getting because they'll be negotiated down. That happens across officials from the sort of official policy teams. It happens at the special advisor level, which I used to do. So I would have spoken to special advisor counterparts in Treasury. And then also it would happen mostly with the Chief Secretary to the Treasury rather than the Chancellor himself. But either way, ministerially, with, for instance, Secretary of State or mid-level ministers on specific things. So that would have been happening for the past few weeks. That probably ended maybe a week or two ago, where they have a sort of guillotine moment where they say, right, we're not taking any more bids or having any more negotiations, and basically Treasury says thank you very much, we'll go away and we'll come back to you. And it sort of kind of goes into a bit of a black box, and there's lots depending on the administration, but there's lots of negotiations between Number 10 in Treasury often. I guess back in the Tony Blair, Gordon Brown days, there was no negotiation, and sort of Number 10 even was kept out of it. I don't think that is quite the case now. There were times when I was a special advisor that the Treasury even took over the communications grids, and that may still well be the case now, which normally that's controlled by Number 10. But like around autumn statement and budgets, it's not unheard of for the Treasury to basically take that over, and it basically Treasury almost becomes like Number 10, where they call you up and ask for things, and they'll say this is what's happening. And then in terms of what's happening over the next couple of days, or what's been happening the past few days within Treasury. So as I say, there's a lot of probably just pinning down the detail. They probably know roughly what they're going to be saying. I doubt the Chancellor's statement itself is fully pinned down, not least because there is one area which blows up into many other knock-on effects, but that's the OBR forecasts. They normally come days before. I think they came on Friday, which basically gives the Chancellor and Prime Minister an idea of how much fiscal headroom they're going to have, and that will then have a knock-on effect as to how much perhaps tax cuts. There's been lots of that in the press, as we've seen on certain things. And like there's talk about inheritance tax or whatever, whether that is going to go ahead or not, or the extent to which certain tax cuts, that's a lot of that is based on the OBR forecast. So that there would have been lots of discussions happening over the weekend, and even right up to the moment.
You mentioned obviously that in terms of, if you look at the papers over the weekend and what's sort of preoccupying people the most, it's the sort of trying to figure out what are going to happen with taxes. Is there going to be income tax cuts? Like obviously that's going to be what impacts most people individually. And so since that's going to dominate, and since that impacts such a large part of the government's budget, what space do you think there actually is for lots of announcements and investments in the science and technology and investment space. Do you think that, from your perspective as someone very much involved in this, that you'll be happy with the space it takes, or do you think that there's a risk that that the priority really becomes these tax cuts?
It sort of depends. I mean, a lot of this, like these like science tech announcements, come from pre-existing budgets, right? So there's been talk about the AI research resource, as it's termed, which is like a sort of supercomputing facility across 2 different sites in Bristol and Cambridge. That basically comes out of a pre-existing budget that was set. I think it was in the budget earlier this year. Having more detail on that is always welcome. Same with like quantum computing, for instance. We know that there's a 2.5 billion budget for that set, and that's over 10 years. So it's not all fully allocated, because that's not how Treasury works. They sort of work in a few years ahead. They don't really work 10 years ahead, but at least it's a government commitment for 10 years ahead. And there's a news announcement this morning that looks as if there might be something in quantum coming. That's about 200 to 300 million moonshot, as they're calling it, seemingly, and that's probably out of the 2.5 billion budget. So there's lots of it's not as if you're just looking for new money and everything that's been announced previously you just forget about. Lots of it is actually working out what's happening with this money, working out what that's going to be allocated to, which the Chancellor can use that for. So a lot of it sort of depends on what's been said before and just getting a bit of extra clarity. But also, I mean, no one's under any illusion that we're in a slightly tight fiscal setting, given the direction of the economy. I mean, things are getting better with inflation coming down. Just was it last week? Has fallen down quite a lot, but I think we shouldn't be under any illusion that we're not. Doesn't mean that suddenly the Chancellor is going to be able to open the floodgates. I'd love to see the Chancellor funds 30,000 GPUs, which is something that both Onward and other think tanks have called for. Which help our supercomputing capabilities and would really. Which is a big challenge for ours, but I mean that costs, that would be into the billions of pounds, and I'm not quite sure the extent to which that is possible, given the balance that has to be had across the economy that the Chancellor's been trying to work on.
So, in terms of what policy announcements that we can expect, which ones will have the most immediate impact on the UK startup and VC sector? Obviously, as you're saying, it's a lot of 10-year plans, billions of pounds at some point in the future. And that's obviously all well and good. You need a long-term strategy. But in terms of in the next sort of year, couple of years, for startups that are looking to grow now, for example, what policy announcements will impact them the most?
There's a lot of it actually boils down to the question of uncertainty, right? So like having that, even if it's an announcement that comes that doesn't have an absolutely immediate impact in and of itself, the fact that that it's happening or is going to happen over the next few years or whatever gives you the certainty to make decisions now, which therefore indirectly it gives you the ability to sort of make immediate decisions and sort of give you immediate benefits. I mean, an example of that is full expensing, which is basically a tax break for small businesses for capital expenditures. So, buying property, plant, equipment, that sort of thing. That is due to be sunsetted. It's due to be ended up, can't remember when, but it's not too far off. And that uncertainty about whether it is or isn't going to come to an end, whether it's maybe going to be extended a little bit, whether it's going to be made permanent, puts small businesses, especially deep tech businesses, which are the most innovative, who often have to invest in, like proper deep scientific equipment.
Yes.
That sort of whether they're going to be able to, keep investing in that over what time periods, etc. This sort of thing will have a direct impact on them, on the decisions that they're taking right now. There's been discussions in the press. A colleague of mine wrote a brilliant article about the need to make this permanent, this full expensing policy permanent. We'll see if that happens, but it's that sort of thing wouldn't have necessarily an actual direct impact right now, but actually the benefits that it would give to small businesses like deep tech startups, etc., it would actually have quite a direct and immediate impact.
We can obviously expect AI to come up, but I wanted to discuss a bit more. Obviously, there was the government-led safety summit in Bletchley quite recently. What are the main policy priorities for the government in the AI space specifically? And do you think that the summit itself has led to some changes on this?
With the AI Safety Summit, I mean, essentially that was, as the name suggests, that was focused on AI safety. They had the creation of AI Safety Institute, which basically is the evolution of the Frontier AI Task Force, which was originally called the Foundation Models Task Force, and has backed by £100 million in investment. You could see more investment for them being set out. I'm not entirely sure. But what's quite interesting is that there's a bit of a debate that has been sparked from this between the question of sort of innovation and safety, and basically there's a sort of question as to the extent to which the UK can ride both horses and be a leader in both, because clearly the government's making a big pitch to be a global leader in AI safety, and that basically involves looking at the regulations that we have even domestically, but also helping to set standards, norms, even understanding of what accounts or amounts to risk in these frontier AI foundation models that we talk about. So that's on one side. The other side, however, is there's a risk with the likes of and a fear from AI startup founders that then focus on safety will mean things like a more aggressive interventionist approach to regulation, which then could inhibit our AI innovation potential, for instance. And that can then lead to people in like founders and startups in the AI innovation hub that we have in the likes of London, which is world leading. It could have a bit of a chilling effect and could lead to people either moving abroad and not setting up as many businesses in London and across the UK. There's a sort of an ongoing debate that's being had right now. Onward, we partnered with the Startup Coalition, who are the sort of tech startup trade body, and the Tony Blair Institute, and we came together to write a paper basically talking about a bit of this dichotomy that exists. And it was a sort of, our message to the government was, it's great that you're doing all this stuff on AI safety. That's really important for our long-term security, for our national resilience, and even for our international influence. And we want to sort of put ourselves on the global map as a global AI player. But let's not forget that there's a lot of things that we need to do in order to harness our world-leading AI innovation capabilities. And I think there's actually one of the knock-on effects of having this AI Safety Summit is that it sort of unleashed such a quite a strong backlash among sort of startup founders and others to say, hey, look, please don't make this focus on safety damage us too much or have too much of a detrimental effect on us. I actually think that the government sort of is feeling that quite acutely, and it's led to it basically leaning into this a bit more, trying to reassure startups both in the UK and I think internationally, because we want to attract the best talent from abroad. I think that actually makes it more likely that we'll see more pro-innovation AI policies, perhaps in the AI in the autumn statement, perhaps. I mean, I don't know specifically what, but you get that feeling from the tone of the government right now.
What about pensions? So I know Onward put out a report last week about reforms to pension funds and making it easier for them to channel pension fund investments basically into startups and high growth companies. I think we can assume that there'll be a mention of that in the statement. It'd be interesting to hear from you, sort of what the status of that is, and if there are still any sort of question marks around the specifics of the policy, and sort of what you're hearing from the sector about this as sort of a cornerstone to the investment strategy, beyond the sort of more techie innovation led stuff that you just talked about.
No, I mean, the pension fund reform thing is one of the ones that as soon as you say it, people switch off because it's not the most sexy of policy areas, frankly, but actually it is incredibly important for long-term, especially scale-up funding, investment funding. So those, especially for those companies that are not just very early stages, but actually looking to properly grow. So this is, when it's beyond just a couple of million at the start, but this is into the tens of millions, or even to hundreds of millions sometimes. But at that point, especially when it's deep tech, which is the kind of experimental scientific and technological companies, they really struggle to get investment, and the UK is one of the best investment spaces in the world, frankly, right? It has the most investment capital, like venture capital in Europe, and also our pension funds that can invest in these things have billions. The UK has, I mean, on different metrics, second to third biggest pension market in the world. So all these things point to a really good sort of fruitful relationship between the two, not least because actually the studies show that these what you call unlisted assets, and basically this asset class, which is basically venture capital, shows to have good returns. So all these things you would think that would basically make the UK brilliant at unleashing its pension funds into its already world-leading tech sector, with the very strong venture capital market that we have in the UK. You'd think that would basically be a marriage in heaven, but actually our pension funds do not fund venture capital and thereby the tech sector on the scale that other countries do. Rightly, the Chancellor spotted this, as have frankly many other chancellors, even going back to Gordon Brown, talked about how much further off the UK was compared to the US back in I think it was his budget in 2000. He talked about this, about how much worse our pension funds were at investing in these sorts of asset classes, and it sort of dogged different governments in the 20 odd years since. The Chancellor has announced what he called the Mansion House Compact reforms, which was over the summer, and you had lots of good announcements in them, such as there was a kind of a voluntary target between some of the biggest, I think it was defined contribution pension funds, or at least 9 of the biggest ones, and they agreed to invest up to 5% of their investments into basically venture capital and private equity, that sort of thing. And there's a few other things in there. He then said that there'll be more coming, more detail, more flesh on the bones coming in the autumn statement. So you're right, we should definitely expect some more coming there. However, there's lots to be done, and we really need to see a lot of detail. I mean, please do have a look at the Onward report on this called Pension Power that came out on Friday, as you mentioned. There's lots of stuff in there, and we do try to make it as brief and as gripping as possible. One of the most immediate things that could be done that we really try to push hard, and have been, frankly, been in touch with the Treasury about this, and that's what we think tanks do. We try to influence government policy. Is the question of a science superpower fund, is what we called it, which is essentially, this is one of the few things within this area that actually could be done quickly, because getting the pension funds to shift their culture, which is one of the problems that we point to in the report, is like changing direction in a tanker. Is not going to happen overnight. However, there are a couple of things like this fund that we talk about that really could be done quickly, where it would be done via the British Business Bank. The fund would be operated by the British Business Bank. It could essentially you get all the smaller pension funds, because the UK has tons of these small pension funds, and that's part of the problem. They don't know how to invest in, they don't quite have the experience or perhaps the capabilities to invest in these sorts of assets. They can basically apportion a small amount of their funds into this bigger fund that's administered by the British Business Bank. It does that across the board and therefore accumulates a lot, and it then goes and invests in capital, and then that sort of the returns to that get given to those pension funds. There's good evidence to suggest that that would be quite successful in getting better returns for savers, which is frankly first and foremost the most important thing for these pension funds, but also then would unleash billions of capital for these for the tech sector and for some of these cash-strapped businesses that we really want to see thrive.
So just a few final points. I might be grasping here, but there was a reshuffle, as no one will have missed. Probably, not among the top headlines, but there have been some changes, or changes will be coming as we speak. At the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology, DSIT, with George Freeman stepping down as Science Minister and Andrew Griffith coming into his place. It'd be interesting to hear what you think of this. Will it be any change? I know that Andrew Griffith has a very sort of clear background in the Treasury and in terms of probably having more of an investment focus, whereas George Freeman has a life science profile. Am I overthinking this? Is it going to be a lot of the same, or do you think that there are any thoughts behind this change?
I mean, I wouldn't speak to whether there's the thinking behind this change, partly because I get a strong impression that George went on his own volition rather than was pushed. I mean, that's certainly how it came across publicly, and I've got nothing to think that isn't the case. But it is a shame that George left. I mean, he was very well respected across this, I mean, as you say, across especially the life sciences sector, but across the board in his brief, was a great advocate for the sector. Was clearly very passionate and very energetic. I saw one of his Conservative MP colleagues said that he had so much energy that if you could plug him into the grid, he'd be able to power half the country or something like that. But that he was just so energetic. So it's a shame that he's gone. However, replacing him with Andrew Griffith is good news. If someone's going to have to replace George, Andrew is a very, very experienced, I mean, professional outside of being a minister and an MP. He was, held a very senior position in Sky, for instance, and lots of other things. So, and also I worked quite closely with him in Number 10 in a couple of roles that he did then, and I saw how capable he is. So he is the real deal. So that's good news as well. There was another change, sort of one rung down ministerially, which was Paul Scully left. Sadly, this looked as if it was less of his own volition. Which is a shame. Paul was another, very experienced minister himself, and is a great guy. He was replaced by someone called Saki Bhatti, who's from the 2019 intake. He's, I guess, less ministerial experience, given I think this is his first ministerial job, but he's very well respected.
On that very positive, friendly note, I think we're gonna wrap up. It's been really good to get all that sort of nitty-gritty detail from you, as well as sort of information for our listeners about what we can expect over the coming days. So thank you so much, Allan, and hopefully I'll have you back at some point in the future.
Yeah, thank you for having me on.